Bias is ever present in today's media environment, though we are often not equipped to deal with it in responsible ways. Perhaps you've cut ties with family or close friends over political disagreements that you cannot see eye to eye on. Maybe you're worried that your news sources aren't giving you the full story. Today's era of polarization can lead to people living in wildly different realities, and it's important now more than ever to understand both sides of an issue. This short video aims to equip you with the tools you need to deal with bias in the media and distill the information you get so that you can make up your own mind. There are two main pairings to pay attention to when consuming media: the speaker and audience, and the subject and topic. Usually, knowing either pair can help you predict bias in the other. For example, knowing the bias of the speaker and the audience can help fill in the blanks regarding the subject and topic. Likewise, understanding how the subject is being portrayed in relation to the topic can help determine bias in the speaker and the audience. We'll look over a couple of examples of news stories to see if you can find the biases on each side of the political aisle. Let's start with right-leaning examples. Let's first use an opinion piece published by David N. Bossie from Fox News. Right out of the gate, the article asserts that for the past 18 months, President Joe Biden and his leftist majority in Congress enacted policies that have created a brutal inflation crisis in our country. Further in the paragraph, the author coins the name Joe the Great Inflator Biden, as well as labels Democrats calling the shots on Capitol Hill as incompetent. This pace continues throughout the article in discussing the Schumer-Manchin Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The first sentence attributes the cause of the inflation crisis to policies passed by the current Democratic-controlled government, while emphasizing the extent of the inflation. The author seems to zero his focus on Democratic policies only, rather than discussing multiple possible factors that could have also contributed to inflation. Further, the author doesn't clearly state what these policies are until later, without explaining any economic theory of why or how this has happened exactly. We're not saying that the author is completely incorrect, but rather his explanation of such facts could be more convincing if a discussion of other possible factors and non-factors and supporting economic theories behind them were included. Later in the piece, the author lambasts the new Democratic-led Schumer-Manchin Inflation Reduction Act as Democrats proposing hundreds of billions in new spending and more devastating tax increases as their catch-all solution to the problem. This line of attack is further continued with the author arguing that rational people with common sense understand that this proposal from the left is chock full of tax and spending gimmicks. The author's sentiments illustrate conservative views on tax increases and excessive spending policies mentioned in the bill. Whether the author has valid points or not, how these points are conveyed is quite generalized without providing many specific examples and economic theory to support them. These generalizations and the strong tone found throughout the article are the causes of an extremely conservative bias in the article. Biasly's AI bias meter provides the score due to 3 negative sentiments for taxes and roughly 10 negative sentiments between Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Biden, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. Bias is expected in an opinion piece. Bias does not necessarily mean that information is wrong. It also doesn't mean that there's anything intrinsically wrong with opinion writing. What is important to understand, however, is that the person writing has already filtered out information in order to write an argumentative and persuasive essay. This means that the piece will only mention information that conveniently furthers their arguments. Because it's an opinion piece, it also offers the writer a lot of leeway to criticize various politicians more than regular reporting will allow. Now, let's discuss left-leaning examples. Let's look at an overseas publication from a UK reporting agency named The Independent. You may not know this agency or which way it leans, so we'll be focusing much more on the subject matter and how it's portrayed. Being able to determine bias without knowing much about the source is an extremely important skill to develop considering the rise in alternative media. One of the first things to notice in this piece is the use of quotations. Quotations on their own do not indicate bias on behalf of the author. How the author contextualizes these quotes from the surrounding text can indicate a bias. For example, let's look at the first sentence of the article. President Joe Biden on Thursday hailed the Inflation Reduction Act, the $433 billion reconciliation package negotiated by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, as a historic agreement to fight inflation and lower costs for American families, and offered his full support for the bill. Using quotes like the historic agreement to fight inflation and lower costs for American families, in conjunction with the previous prideful language of hailed, helps build the case and confirmation bias that the author agrees with Joe Biden's characterization of the bill. Further, the author uses Manchin's own characterization of the bill later in the piece. The West Virginia Democrat said he believes his proposal will not only fight rising prices, but address our nation's energy and climate crisis by adopting common sense solutions through strategic and historic investments that allow us to decarbonize while ensuring American energy is affordable, reliable, clean, and secure. The author bolsters this sentiment by mentioning the president noted that experts who've criticized his domestic agenda for fueling inflation in the past have said Mr. Manchin's proposal will reduce inflationary pressures. The author allows Manchin's characterization of the bill to stand by mentioning support from the president and impartial experts. When the prior quotes are put into context, it leads the reader to view the bill, its climate policies, extra spending, and the actors mentioned in a positive light. The article ignores alternative expert viewpoints on the bill and doesn't mention the proposed additional spending increases explicitly. It's important for the readers to know how the bill will effectively reduce inflation through justified economic theory. Additionally, all other policy implications that affect the American people, including tax increases and national debt, were not discussed. Again, we're not saying how good the bill is or isn't, but what we're suggesting is that the author can eliminate bias by addressing alternative viewpoints and possible weaknesses within the explanation and justification of the bill, which, in hope, will increase transparency. According to the Biasly analysis, this piece reports as very liberal due to positive sentiments for clean energy and socialized healthcare. Chuck Schumer, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden are also reported on in a very positive light. So let's go over some things to watch out for. Common signs of bias can often be seen in comparisons between politicians or political parties, favorable or unfavorable coverage on one side of the aisle and emphasized statements, frequent use of adjectives, sarcasm, omitting inconvenient facts, and telling one side of the story through generalizations. We hope that this exercise proves useful in helping you determine bias in your everyday life. It can be very difficult to find viewpoints from both sides of the aisle, considering our current media environment. This is why Biasly conveniently gives you stories from conservative, moderate, and liberal viewpoints on our side-by-side news page. You can access this page by clicking on the side-by-side button at the top right of our homepage.